Hello, this is a test. Good afternoon. My name is Mark, and we'll start welcome you to GovSchool this afternoon. We're going to have a local lesson session where we're going to talk about infrastructure. It's, of course, Infrastructure Week, and I just want to make sure everybody's aware that it's a live YouTube broadcast as well. So please maintain your privacy. You're able to unmute yourself as well as you can raise your hand and I'll answer questions as we go along. This will be about a 20-minute session today, and we're just going to have a quick overview of some of the discussions that were related to infrastructure spending. I think a lot of us have heard that terminology in a buzzword sort of way. The American Rescue Plan is out there, and so this is something of interest to a lot of our members. And there's going to be a significant amount of money. We've heard numbers as high as between $2 and $3 trillion. So that's a significant appropriation coming from the federal government down to the state and local government level. And I want to make sure everybody really kind of understands how that works as we get prepared to be what's referred to as being ready to go whenever we're talking about government contracting. You know, I think a lot of us are have seen the legislation that is out there related to the American Rescue Plan, and it's in a number of different areas, and I think that we are hearing in terminology that is not, traditionally involved in infrastructure spending. And so I wanted to kind of pull up. Let's see here, it's the American Rescue Plan. I think it's what the terminology the politicians are calling it, and it has to do with. Of course, then we have a bill there, and the American Jobs Plan is along with that. And it's appropriations there's not yet defined. They're negotiating. The jobs plan part, there's a fact sheet that's been released, as you can go in, and it's released at the White House level, but now we've got Congress negotiating on top of the rescue plan. So they've got a lot of money flowing through, and you can see some of the major goals that they're trying to attempt to address, coming in and talking about roads and bridges, which is what we traditionally think about when we think of infrastructure. And we also are looking at public transit dollars, enhancing that, reliable passenger and freight rail service, electrification of vehicles, and also just green energy in general. Also, a lot of money going into our ports and our waterways and the airports. And then going in and looking at some historical inequities in terms of the social aspect of infrastructure and making sure that they address that. But how does that really turn into dollars? When that's always an important part of the process, and making sure we understand that. Congress, of course, they get there and they do a lot of the hand wringing and making the sausage, as it's sometimes referred to, or where they go in and negotiate and come through with a bill, either through an earmark where a particular project or product is line item in the budget, most likely going to do a reconciliation version of the budget on this process. We have a blog that kind of explains how that works, but it means it's really ready to go. It's going to be there for you, companies to respond to, and so that's an important distinguishing factor. Make sure we understand that these projects are not going to be like a long-term planning process. It's going to be a snap funding moves forward, and then those governments that have funding to either match it through potentially the community development block grant or other types of funding, they're going to actually be able to go in there and get those projects going, or working into the system for social infrastructure type related activities, making sure that they address all the issues necessary in order to get to that magic vote requirement, either the 60 vote or the 51 vote in our Senate and in the House, approving that, and then moving those funds to local governments and state governments very quickly. And even though it's funded by the federal government, it's important we understand that most projects, though, are going to be let by either a state agency, some of the big Department of Transportations, for example, Department of Community Affairs or Administrative Affairs in certain communities, certain states. So it's going to be those large at the state level, and then funneled down either to a large city or to a smaller organization, smaller government, maybe even sometimes we like to point out the in our demonstrations how we got this fragmented marketplace, and it exists. And so there's a lot of different activities. There's all these special districts, hospital authorities, airports, parks, transit systems. A lot of times these special districts are governed by other governments, or either a combination of a public-private initiative. But moving through those in sort of a puzzling way, I use a puzzle here, the diagram, this fragmentation, but a system that's not broken. So it's important that you understand really where to look whenever a project is potentially defined as infrastructure. We, of course, at GovDirections, at your main page, where we highlight a couple of different keywords. One of those is the infrastructure bids, where you can go in and just quickly see the ones that we have defined as infrastructure. But then one by one, as projects come in, here's, for example, here's an acquisition of school buses. It's going to be funded at $1 million level, defined in infrastructure sort of a way. It's long-term investment for a government, and so they've had budget for, planned for it, and then are going to acquire those projects. And so when you see those type projects, and you look through in our account, in your individual accounts, you can then see where the governments are at. Of course, like this one here is in Norfolk, and it's going to be in their budget in 2022. So whenever Congress goes through and they appropriate funds for projects, it's going to go into those projects that are ready to go. This is an attempt to not only reinvest in our country, but also to continue the emphasis on growing our economy. And so they're going to be looking for projects that are funded. And so here we report back to you, for example, what's referred to as a capital improvement plan. And in a capital improvement plan, you learn about these, but go into an individual city. And here's just one in Norfolk. And they've just recently appropriated this budget on May 11th. So the government, the city council, and the local community have gotten together. They've decided this is where we really want to place the emphasis of our local community. And when we're able to the budget projects in the near future through our capital improvement plan, then we're going to do so. And so they've started talking about it, thinking about it, really where the rubber meets the road. And given that those presentations in public hearings have had a lot of impact, and they even have a dashboard for the community and really understand where they want to spend their money for capital improvement or infrastructure related activities, long-term investments in the community, and everybody's weighed in. So it's just natural for Congress to want to help fund that, as opposed to recreating or re-envisioning a process that's already occurred. That decision-making process is oftentimes very difficult, so there's no reason to stir that up when they can come in and take a look at a budget that a government's talked about and have really put a lot of emphasis in. And for example, here's their capital improvement plan, and also unfunded capital requests. These are things that they want to do, they just don't have the funding to do just yet. So the ones that right away going in and taking a look at the infrastructure projects they've talked about and they've approved. If Congress can come and say, yeah, let's get this off the table. We're going to give you $3 million to make this happen. You just need to match it with $3 million. And so this government here is able to step forward, have a savings community, reinvest the additional monies in other types of infrastructure when they can through that savings. And so they can maximize that investment in their community. So when we're watching for infrastructure projects, the first thing we do is go back to that capital improvement plan. And almost always there's either, and this one here is about a 4 to 5 year plan, but it's taken, of course, a lot longer period to put that in place, but they continue to move it out every year. But some governments will have a 10-year plan, but 5-year tends to be the most appropriate, the most common that we see. And so we're watching for those, and then they'll tell you which particular projects they're going to fund in that fiscal year, including the types. Here we're looking at initially more traditional type activities, but then we get into some global sort of social justice related activities, like here reinvesting completely into a community, $3 million, and going in and doing maybe potentially small projects or funding neighborhood initiatives and so forth. And so we're going to watch sort of the differences in those. And then, as I mentioned here, even where we're looking at unfunded capital requests, these are ones that they've talked about. They know that they need to do in their community. Funds are just not available. And you want to come in and watch those as well. And then they'll explain what they're hoping to accomplish. And when a project is at this point in the government's funding cycle, it is really still in a development stage. And so you can go in there and you can practice more traditional business development, get involved and introduce yourself into that community, so that, when they do go out to bid, maybe potentially you're in an agile way and involved in the procurement process. And I think that gives you a sort of even if not just a better understanding so that you can bid better, but it does tend to give you a leg up in the competition when there does including competition, but and also helping with ideas and how to accomplish a particular objective in a more efficient way for that community. And so you want to watch for those. GovDirections does that. We actually go in and we go through the individual capital improvement budgets. In fact, we have a whole category just for capital improvement plan reviews that we're doing. But in general, though, when we see those, we will actually go in and catalog those in your individual classifications in your budgets, the ones that are matching you, coming to you. For example, grounds maintenance projects in North Carolina. So these are major investments. They've talked about it over time, so that you can learn them. We always mark those with intelligence designation, but we do have individual categorizations as well in the various areas. And I've thought about even changing some of our consulting type projects to call those more infrastructure now, as we are broadening that definition to include potentially social justice and social needs in our community, understanding that's the groundwork for long-term productivity in order to gain, continue to improve a community. But the more traditional ones, you always see a lot of projects on infrastructure, marine construction, marine dredging, a lot of money going into our ports. If you're on the East Coast, West Coast, or in the Gulf area, watch for those. Those are long-term traditional projects issued at the federal level through the Corps. But the state and local government's still there for environmental type purposes. You see those all marked with intelligence type of notes. The ones that are clearly federal, when they come out, this is a demolition project, for example, rehabilitation. Go in and look at a couple of these, dealing with fires, for example, in Arizona. These are active contracts that are there. Some of these are small business set-asides. We'll tell you that in your review when you first get the actual bid, always in the title, and speaking to the Federal Acquisition Regulation or acquisition.gov, where these bids are actually covered and how you're going to go in there and win those and what you have to do in order to win them. But these are, not traditionally so small. This one here is about $250,000 at the end of the day. Then going in, you can see some of the others, pre-solicitation ones, giving you a heads up that it's coming. This is a water basement improvement one there, for example. Let me just look at some of these here. A tower bid that's coming up. This is a larger project in California. They will give you a heads up that it's coming. Still a small business set aside, about $1 million project, and telling you what is going to occur. Bid's not out yet. You need to have your capability statement ready to go. And at this point in time, they're probably already requesting the capability statement. When you're stepping through there, they want you to go ahead, send that in before they issue the bid proposal, the RFP. Oftentimes that's part of the request for information stage. And so use that process to your advantage, kind of going through some of these. And then, whenever we're talking about the social justice ones, looking potentially at social services, youth and aging projects. These are going to be continuum of care, youth programs, reinvesting in our housing related activities. Another category I would want you to watch for the upcoming, pending were major investments in affordable housing and other initiatives in communities to make sure we are able to meet the objectives of the organizations have to serve their citizens. Fair housing program, for example. So it's going to be broader than the traditional infrastructure related activities for bridges and roads and playgrounds or stadium construction. We're going to have a session next week devoted specifically just to sports activities. It's going to be a lot of investments in sports and in recreational. It's one way when a government agency starts budgeting, and you have a group of people starts budgeting for projects, big investment projects, and they look for things that everybody agrees on. You want to make sure you got your roads funded. A lot of that's funded through sales tax initiatives, and then you want to make sure you got your general utility structures in place. But the third one's going to always be recreation. Everybody wants to see solid recreational activities funded in their community, and it's a win-win situation. And when governments invest in this, citizens reward them by re-election, and that's a very important part of governing. And so we like to call attention to those, and you kind of look at just all the different bids that are out there right now, just for parks and recs and other types. So here's a river forest for $5.5 million in Illinois. They're looking at doing something in the engineering department. Unusual activity right there, but $5.5 million funded for it. Kind of look through some of these here for you. Bike programs, bike paths. Everybody's walking more nowadays, funding those walking trails. Those are the top projects going to be easy for Congress to deliver to their citizens. They're going to be line item, and they're probably going to be between $500,000 to $1 million range. They're going to be ones that a congressperson can come back into their community about this time next year and say, look what I've done. Look what I've funded. And this is going to be a particular project they can identify. And that's why earmarking is so popular. And so you're going to see the reward for those who vote for this proposal, and have those projects will be funded first. And so they're going to be using those capital improvement plans in your communities to drive those. But let's just look at all of the ones that are going to be funded right now. So that's a very large category. I also would want to point out we're monitoring who's winning stimulus-related activities. These are funding the projects that either through the American Rescue Plan, they're coming forward with the American Jobs Plan, or the 4 previous appropriation measures that dealt with the pandemic relief. And you can come in already and you can see we've been cataloging the sports ones. Here's the sports activities that across the country, everywhere. As I mentioned, agencies are looking to fund those. Let's see what we got here in the South in Greenville. This is a bid for a baseball field was approved for $196,000 in Greenville. Another one for another baseball field. A lot of baseball fields. Getting those children back out there and serving the community in a lot of different ways. And whenever we see those baseball fields, remember we're talking about uniforms, we're talking about bleachers, we're talking about printing, and we're talking about publishing, and we're talking all kinds of different associated bids that go along with that. So don't think just that when you think infrastructure, think about the big picture. And those projects are going to be forthcoming. And we already know that the next quarter is going to be the largest spending period in American history. It's going to be a significant amount of funding is flowing through. And so with that, we're at the 3:20 mark. I promise you about 20 minutes worth of GovSchooling today. We know at GovSchool, we can teach you to win, then you're going to win more projects. And that is our goal and our objective. And so I thank you for sharing your time with us today. And everybody have a great afternoon.